naturopathic doctor, as I said. So I'm licensed to provide primary care in Oregon, but I work over telemedicine with people in any state across the US, more in a health coach or consulting role. And I work primarily with people who are living with disabilities, either developmental neurological disabilities like autism. So I do a lot of neurodiversity work and advocacy, or people living with chronic conditions like MS. And my whole approach is how to live well with these challenges in our bodies and minds.
Exactly, exactly. Well, a little bit about how we met. We met through your daddy. I've known you since you were a young girl, and I've had the joy of watching you grow up and get interested in MS advocacy, as well as all your wonderful things with holistic medicine and all the wonderful things you're doing now. But tell us a little bit what it was like growing up with a father with multiple sclerosis.
Of course. So dad was diagnosed when I was in eighth grade, so I was 13, with primary progressive MS. And it was, I think, interesting for me at the beginning just to observe what that process was like for him to accept and get used to. At the beginning, he was very private. He didn't want to share the diagnosis. He didn't want to have any visual cues that he was different, or disabled in that way. And I think it was mostly because he wanted to maintain life as it had been. He didn't want this to be this major disruption to the whole family. Um,
Exactly.
yeah, but I
Yeah.
didn't quite understand it in the sense that I didn't have any shame in it. So he had to work through that for himself, but he expected us, I think, to be embarrassed. And that was never something that I went through at all. I remember when we did college tours, and he pulled me aside and he asked me for permission to use the cane on the walks. And I
Right.
was so confused that he was even asking the question. I was like, well, of course, it's going to help you do the walk. Why not?
Right.
But yeah,
Right.
a lot of the more emotional components at the beginning.
I think I know your dad well, and it is hard. Everybody living with a chronic disease, whether it's multiple sclerosis or it could be any diagnosis, I think it's really hard to accept, and you don't want to look as different. And again, here is your lovely, very outgoing father. I'm sure he didn't want to scare you and your sister with this diagnosis because, again, when both your dad and I were diagnosed, there were not a lot of there were not a lot of people, especially diagnosed with primary progressive MS in the future. You just didn't know what it was going to look like. And for your dad, he's just slowly has progressed in his disease versus myself, where my disease was great for a while and people did not know I had multiple sclerosis. And then it was like, wow, all of a sudden within 3 years, I ended up in a motorized wheelchair and I couldn't disguise my diagnosis anymore. So I had to embrace it. And
It's thinking.
your dad and all, how brave. Yes, yes, but I just know how brave your father is. And I always love, especially when we go for the college reunions at Vanderbilt, your dad dances and he embraces his MS and his cane. And it's just so fun to see that your dad now has come out and he's much more easygoing, if you want to say about it. So
Absolutely.
for
He has
you,
mastered the one leg pirouette with the cane.
has he? Oh my goodness, he really has, and it's so fun. We'll have to see if I have a recording, and with your dad's permission, maybe I can put it on our site. But tell me a little bit about for you as a child growing up, and now as an adult working in the field with disabilities. How is it for you now to accept your dad with multiple sclerosis and how to teach others about disabilities?
Well, I think my own journey was an important piece of that. So when I was living in New York City, I went to Columbia for undergrad, and then I lived and worked in the city for a few years, and I got quite ill myself during that time. And
No.
so I went through the whole workup for MS because of dad, and the symptoms kind of suggested that's what was going on. And it ended up not being MS, and at that time they didn't figure out what was happening for me. But it's a very different experience to be in your early 20s and to have limitations to your body that your peers aren't having. And so
Right,
coming to terms with that, whether or not what the diagnosis is, or just the everyday reality is the same, like, well, I have to think about that, I may not have the spoons to do that day kind of thing.
right, right,
Um, and so for me, this desire to work with people who live with disabilities, it's come, I think, from an interest in mental health, and this idea that, like, really everyone has the right to live well, to enjoy our lives, and that doesn't have to mean without disabilities. So
right.
the naturopathic world is all about wellness, and there's this idea of wellness that gets sort of marketed, that's perfect body and perfect health, the perfect weight, perfect skin, um, you
Yes,
know, no anxiety ever, just everything's fine. And that's just not
yes.
the reality for most of us. And so I think it's important to me to shift that and think about what it means to be disabled and well, to be different and well.
Well, tell everybody out there a little bit about what you do with the neuropathic, um, your practice.
Yeah, so my practice, so I have a PhD or doctorate in naturopathic medicine and a Master of Science in integrative mental health. So my approach is really about the whole person wellness. So the physical is a component, but also the emotional, the mental, and sometimes the spiritual, depending on whether or not that's important for that person. And
Right,
so I'm working with people to reprioritize, what's important to them. So, maybe the symptom that the doctor is most concerned about, that, you're working with your specialist on, is the priority they're holding. But maybe the thing that's really bothering you the most is the fact that you have abdominal pain after you eat. And it may not
right.
be the most serious thing that you're dealing with, but it's the thing it's inhibiting your quality of life. And so my focus is more on that level. What's important to you? What would it take for you to be able to answer the question, how are you? With, I'm doing well.
Right, right. Well, it's so important. There's just not enough of this type of mindset and practicing medicine out there. And with everything that has gone on in the last few years, you are so vital to the wellness of all, whether you have a chronic illness or not. You're really a very vital part to healing yourself mentally and physically. So it's just amazing. So tell us a little bit of how people can get a hold of you.
So my website is weldonwellness.com. So you can do a discovery call to get to know more about me, and there's some more information about, my approach there. But naturopathic medicine in general is, so my license includes the ability to diagnose, to prescribe pharmaceuticals, to do all of those things. But our approach is different primarily in philosophy. So we learn a lot more about nutrition and movement and herbs and stress reduction. Often you'll leave the MD's office and you'll have a list like sleep 8 hours a night,
Right,
change your diet in these ways, exercise 45 minutes a day, 6 days a week. Here you go, you'll be fine. But there isn't any support on how to actually do that.
right,
So
right.
a lot of times we know what the what is, but how to make it work for our lives and our bodies, and with limitations that we may have, is a much more challenging process. So I take a really experimental attitude to that, like, so you can't get overheated. How can you move without getting overheated? You know,
Exactly.
that kind
That's
of
right. And what devices can you use and
thing. Hmm.
suggestions and we need to hear more of that because again, working with you and knowing who you are, you have just done wonders for so many. And it's not just with multiple sclerosis. I want to remind everybody out there, it's with all types of chronic illnesses. Autism is a very special focus for you, I know. Let us know a little bit more. Tell people out there a little bit about that.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think about disability, or disability studies splits it into two perspectives. So there's the medical model of disability and the social model of disability. You're nodding, so if you're with me here, that's good. So, in the MS is a disability through the medical model. This is something that I've never met anyone with MS who would not like it to be cured. Right? This is
Right.
something that is separate from who you are and your identity, and it is something we want to treat, we want to prevent, and we want to cure it when we can.
Right.
So, the social model of disability looks more at what is preventing access to the world. So if you think of, a person wants to go to a meeting that's on the second floor and there's only stairs and you're in a motorized wheelchair. So in the medical model, the problem in this situation is the fact that you need to use the chair. But in the
Right.
social model of disability, the problem is the stairs. The problem is the fact that there isn't an elevator that gets you into the room where you want to be. And so I think of autism as a disability from the social model, which means that from my perspective, and full disclosure, because I'm out professionally, I do have an autism diagnosis myself. So I think it was in med school that I finally figured out what's happening with my body in New York, which is that I have a connective tissue disorder called Ehlers-Danlos syndrome and a couple things that go along with that. And then I also started to realize that I have this sensory overload and that I was processing things differently. As you get through med school, you learn more and more and you start to see like, something is different about my experience here. Um, and so I got a diagnosis of autism myself. And I was struck by the fact that I like these differences about myself. So this feels different to me. So Ehlers-Danlos is a condition that I would be happy to have cured. It's inconvenient to have my joints come out of place when I don't want them to, right? But I like the way that I process information and that having that intense sensory experience makes walking through the woods a really beautiful and special thing. And so it is still a disability because the world's not set up for people who have nervous systems like this at all.
Right.
And so through the social model, it's still a disability, and advocating for easier access and for accommodations and for really acceptance. For me, I can't separate being a physician from being an advocate in those ways.
Exactly, exactly. Well, tell us a little more about how you work with people with multiple sclerosis and suggestions for us living with MS.
Yeah. So all of my work, like I said, is virtual. Unless you happen to live in Frankfort, Kentucky, in which case you're
Right.
welcome to see me in person. But mostly I'm working online. And so we're doing, I focus a lot on the mental emotional piece first. So even today, actually, I got a newsletter from the MS Society that was talking about how important addressing anxiety and depression are in that first year after diagnosis.
Right.
So something
Right.
like 47% of people are going through depression during that time. And
I,
so a lot of my
I
work
agree
is
with that.
processing that and making sense of that and coming to terms with it, grieving, but also finding hope. So that sort of thing. And then also just the baselines of health. I think sometimes when people are living with a specific disease, that disease gets all the attention. And there's still the rest of the body needs care too. So, you can have MS and have high blood pressure or diabetes or something like that. So I really spend a lot of time focusing on the baselines, the really basics of health. Nutrition. So there are diets that have some evidence, particularly for MS, like the Walls Protocol has some
Right.
promise. I think it's more, I take a more individualized approach. So it's removing, like if you have food sensitivities, then removing them is going to decrease inflammation in your body and you're going to feel better. But if you
Yeah.
don't have food sensitivities, then I'm not going to take any foods away, right?
Right. Right.
Um, and then I'll use herbs and supplements. So one of the nice things about having a medical degree, it means that even if I'm not prescribing any pharmaceuticals, I know which herbs and supplements are safe to take with the pharmaceuticals that someone may be on. Um, we also, talk about movement and how to accommodate that for, what the body's limitations are. Like, are we doing something in a chair? Are we doing something in water to keep the body temperature down? Kind of life hacks in that way. And
Yeah.
sometimes that happens with nutrition too. It's like, so buy the vegetables pre-chopped. Like, there's lots of little hacks like that. So that's the
I
level where I'm mostly working.
I love that because all of those are great. I mean, when you go to the grocery and things are already prepared for you, it does make life a little bit easier during that time of of stressing, whether you're already working with a chronic illness, or even if you're disabled and you have something making food for you, you may pay a little bit more money for the pre-chopped items, but it's for your mental health and wellness and all those good things and all. So, Laura, it has been wonderful. We're going to keep it to our 30 minutes today. But everybody out there, I want you to follow Laura. She is on Instagram. She has a wonderful website that we'll post down below after this is over. And it has been wonderful, Laura, and we have to do this again. And say
Yeah, it's
hi.
been great to talk to you, Terry. Thanks for having me.
Great. Thank you. Bye, all. Bye. Okay, I need my glasses real quick. That wasn't the greatest, but we tried. I'm sorry your hand got tired.